Okay, we've got a question from TA. Thank you so much for the contribution. As Christian authority became more centralized and intertwined with the government, what do you feel were the impetus to close the canon? Wouldn't continuation of public revelation have better served their power dynamic?
You would think if you can have like a centralized form of public, I'm going to let you answer this. You're a centralized form of public revelation.
Yes, with the Latter-day Saint Church does that and does technically have an open canon, but the central leadership is loath to kind of use that pedal, even though there's a document called the Proclamation on the Family, which was developed in the 90s as there was a lot of gay marriage stuff going on in the courts, and there was an argument, this is central to our beliefs, and they're like, not in any documents that we've seen. And then they went, we have a document now, this is central to our beliefs. There are people who advocate every year for that to be canonized, and there are many other people who pray that it never becomes canonized.
Right.
We're obviously talking about in the early church. However, I think as the rationalizations for trying to delineate what's going to be considered inspired scripture are bubbling to the surface in the 2nd and 3rd and 4th centuries CE, I think they kind of painted themselves into a corner where they couldn't really, because they were saying, well, these people need to have, be eyewitnesses or have apostolic authority or these kinds of things. And they kind of roped off the opportunity to contribute more to the canon. And I think based on what I've read, it seems like Athanasius was one of the main, that's where things really turned a corner regarding the canon. And that was, he wanted to clamp things down, and Revelation was one of his trump cards in his canon, and very little changed after that.
So Athanasius is like a key figure because he's a classic example of someone who wants to close the canon, who has the same list that we have. What we have with him, and we have with other people advocating for a closed canon, is all of these groups, they're sort of authority figures, they're bishops, they're leading thinkers, and they're all in dialogue with or have experience of what happens when other people claim that they have direct revelation. So Athanasius really struggled with this group of women at a monastery outside of Alexandria who have a bunch of extra beatitudes about women, for example. He hates that. It's a classic example of why he doesn't want people adding on. Or when you think about, by the time people are even meeting as early as Nicaea, they are meeting in the wake of a sort of schism in North Africa, where you have one group, the group that ultimately loses, the Donatists, who claim that they do have direct revelations from the Holy Spirit. And there's another example of they're like, oh, we don't like these people, and they do exactly that. And so I think all the people who are making these decisions have direct experience of what happens when someone you disagree with claims that they have direct revelations from God. It's a little unwieldy.
Yeah. So it is an effort to kind of, they're kind of painting themselves in the corner while they try to paint other people out of the picture by saying no. And this is one, I think I've long made a case that religious dogmas have kind of a life cycle, and frequently you are chasing down the implications of the decisions you make. Every decision you make has implications that you can't anticipate and don't know about. And then later on down the road, you've got to deal with those implications. And two questions from me related to this. Do you think that the Nag Hammadi codices were buried in reaction to Athanasius's structuring of power, or do you think that's after that? Where do you think, is it related?
No, I do not think that they were. I think it seems like Nicola Denty Lewis has a great article on this. And I think if you're watching this online, you can probably get it from her academia.edu page. No, I don't think that. It seems like they were just kept as part of a monastic library alongside other books. there's really no sort of like orthodox persecution of the Gnostics in the 4th century. I know it sounds cool. I know we all love secret hidden books and persecution, but it doesn't seem like the data supports that to me. And also a bunch of those books that we think of as like secret hidden books, but actually just came out of, booksellers in Cairo, and we don't know where they came from. Hidden library sounds great.
Yeah, well, so that. And Jordan-led codices is something that tries to tap into that that whole desire. And the other question was, Lee Martin McDonald seems convinced by Clara Rothschild's argument that the Muratorian fragment is late 4th century. Do you agree, or do you think?
Yeah, I think this is Clara Rothschild's best work to date. I'm with her.
Okay, definitely. Good. I am too. That, in fact, I'm doing a large scale survey of the state of the field for biblical studies, and that's one of the questions I'm including in there. I'd like to know if that is a consensus view now. But yeah, a lot of people point to the Muratorian fragment as a 2nd century, delineation of the canon that's very close to what we have now, and Claire and others have argued strongly that it is actually from the late 4th century, pretending to be mid 2nd century. Here's one from Philip from the Discord. Hey, doctors. My wife likes a scene in Muppets from Space where they are posing as doctors. They go, doctor. Hey, doctors, passages like John 6:44 through 51 are often adduced as arguments for predestination or double predestination. Would the original authors / audience have what would the original authors / audience have made of that passage? I'm going to have to punt. I have no.
Are you from the denomination that believes in predestination of the two of us here? Isn't there more predestination in Latter-day Saint theology than in Catholic theology?
Predestination, I don't. The foreordination is the concept that's
definitely not splitting hairs.
Well, it's still a little different from predestination. It is not quite Calvinistic, but honestly, it's not something that I think a lot of Latter-day Saints think hard about. We tread along the surface of these conceptual frameworks.
Yeah. Okay. So we can talk about John 6 if you want. Okay. So that passage, it's from the kind of like, you have the feeding of the 5,000 passage according to John, and then you have the long discourse that follows. And it's sort of towards the end of that, before you get to the passage the Catholics like to cite, the cannibalism passage, as others might know it, the transubstantiation passage. And much like the Catholic transubstantiation reading, this is a later interpretation of the Gospel of John. I think this is, John is a very supersessionist text. I don't think this is about predestination exactly, so much as it is about a particular understanding about salvation being exclusively restricted to people who know Jesus.
Okay, that makes sense. I hope that answers your question, Philip.
Right.
We've got another question from TA. Respecting foreordination as it relates to LDS theology, wouldn't open theism best reflect both the position of ancient Israel in the biblical text and fit an LDS perspective on limitations to God's foreknowledge? That's the kind of question that most Latter-day Saints will have no idea what that means to begin with. So, and this is a more of a theology question. You're the professor of theology, but but no, you're a historian. I honestly don't have strong feelings about that. I've never thought about that before. So do you have any thoughts on that, or do you think that's another or you're gonna pass?
I'm just now, it's like you're asking me to open part of my brain, push back the cobwebs to think about theology. But if we're going to talk about limitations to God's foreknowledge, one of the arguments I make in my book is the reason why Jesus doesn't know the timing of his return, which is like a huge problem, theologically speaking. Like, why doesn't Jesus know that? He's supposed to be God. Is that he's being depicted as an enslaved overseer. And the only thing you don't tell your enslaved overseer is when you might show up to oversee their work, because otherwise everyone will look busy when you show up. So that would be my comment on God's foreknowledge. Watch me make that question about me. Amazing. I can't even believe I pulled that out.
I think to the degree any Latter-day Saints have thought hard about this, I think they would probably lean a little bit more into open theism than something like predestination. But once they start talking about it, I think there's a whole trail of crumbs that they're going to follow, and who knows where that's going to end up. I have no interest in following that trail myself, just because my interests are also more historical than theological. But there are plenty of Latter-day Saint scholars who I think would be very interested in that. But thank you for a very generous question. We got another question over here from Hayden.
Can I just clear something up for someone in the chat? Someone asked what manumission is. Manumission is when an enslaver sets an enslaved person free. Now, if you're thinking, well, why don't they just say emancipate? Because emancipation is when a government sets enslaved people free. Sorry about that confusion, Lauren. And I also wanted to say to Jay Bear, who said that we're triggering her PTSD. We're very sorry, and we probably should have given some kind of trigger warning about just like the topic in general. There's one particular paper I give where I'm like, if you need to leave, please feel free, because it is really dark. And this is a dark subject, so I just want to apologize and say that we see you and we can.
I'm going back over to the chat. Jason Stevens is here. Hi, Jason. Hope you're doing all right. And David Burnett says hi. Good to see you, David. Hope you've been doing all right. Hope it's not too cold there. What's that?
I was just waving and saying hi, David.
Oh, okay. So here we have a question, another one from TA. Thank you so much, TA. Dr. Moss, how did Christian conversion affect the slave-master dynamic from a historical perspective?
Yeah, so this might be a place that people get a little itchy, much like your Labradoodle. Here's the thing that I think we need to acknowledge is that in the ancient world, when people were enslaved, if their master or mistress converts to a new religion, they convert to, and they don't really have any say in the matter. And that is common of all religions in antiquity. And the tough part about that is that's coercive. We don't know if they have a say in the matter. We don't even know if it's like a real conversion. You know, in Christian terms, it's supposed to be a faith thing happening. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. At the same time, there are many elements of the New Testament and early Christianity that are liberatory and subversive and resist hierarchical structures and oppression. And we can imagine that those would have been appealing to enslaved people in a genuine way. The important thing to recognize that in no instance can we say for sure we know this person chose to become Christian of their own free will.
But Galatians 3:28 would certainly be a good selling point for Christianity for enslaved folks.
Yes, although you can imagine that when you heard that read at a dinner party and you're there, your enslavers there, pretty much when you're picking up your coats when you leave at the door, you pick back up your traditional hierarchy. You're probably not going to be like, hey, neither slave nor free. That is later in the evening. So.
Despite Paul's frequent appeals to be nice to your enslaved people, what he seems to be walking on eggshells sometimes too, because he's like, hey, consider maybe being a little because that's a right that he doesn't really have the right to trample on or efface.
He's also
Christians.
heavily reliant on donations, support, and the lending of enslaved workers from exactly the kind of people who are wealthy enough to own them. So, own in quotation marks. So, he can't really bite the hand that feeds him too many times. It has to be gently done. It has to feel like a lick.
He's got to pick his battles.